From the Watson Institute at Brown University, welcome to Mark and Carrie, the June edition. Hello there, Professor Blyth. How are you?
Well, hello there, Carrie. It's lovely to see you. I'm still stuck in my basement.
Yeah.
But at least it's sunny outside. I mean, it's record-breaking heat waves. I don't know if we should worry about that, but let's not start there. Where do you want to start our wonderful monthly, kind of quasi-monthly news roundup?
You have a nice fluorescent light tan. I can,
Yeah, totally. I've got the shiny dome.
Yes. Oh, geez. Well, a lot has happened since we last spoke, and most of it is just kind of dire. Of course, there were the two mass shootings, one in Buffalo, New York, and the other in Uvalde, Texas. To be honest with you, Mark, I don't know that I have a lot to say that hasn't been said. And mostly I just kind of feel like a jerk trying to say too much about it because it's just so horrific and it's hard to interact with it just knowing the context, and they were like third and fourth grade. So kind of everything. So I don't have a lot of deep thoughts on that just because it's just so sad and tragic.
It's not that I have any deep thoughts on it, but I'll talk about one thing. There's a sociologist, an Irish bloke who, like me, moved to the United States to do a PhD and never went back. His name's Kieran Healy. He's a very smart chap, and he posted on his website a really, really brilliant, just one-page thing that made the following argument. If you're a sociologist, one of the things that you study in societies is how we institutionalize rituals. Mm-hmm. And he gave an example of he went through the Catholic First Communion and confirmation, as I did, as it happened to be, 40 years ago or whenever it was. And his nephew was doing the same thing. And obviously, the Irish society has massively changed in those intervening periods. But that ritual, in a sense, still gives a kind of meaning and stability, etc. These are kind of the building blocks of what makes societies into distinct societies. Mm-hmm. And then he just did this pivot and said, if you think about mass shootings in America, what we've done is to basically institutionalize the ritualistic and regularized murder of children so that we can celebrate an abstract principle, which is an absurdist conception of freedom. And I just thought that was an incredibly powerful way of reflecting upon the utter stupidity and tragedy of the entire thing.
Well, and what struck me more than it has, and I don't know that it ever stuck in my brain, is that it only happens in the United States. It doesn't happen in any other country around the world.
Yeah. And when you've got people like Abbott suddenly popping up to say, it's a mental health crisis, despite the fact that he's been slashing mental health funding. It's just the last refuge of scoundrels. I mean, when Australia had a mass shooting, they just went, right, no more guns. And they handed in all the guns. And everyone went, yeah, it's pretty fair. Yeah. Britain after Dunblane, right, no more handguns. All the handguns. Everybody does this, but not here. And let's not get into it. The Second Amendment, it's in the Constitution. No, that's an amendment. That's not in the Constitution. You can amend an amendment. But never mind. All of that's there. We know nothing's going to happen. We'll get the Republicans giving it thoughts and prayers, and then we'll all be even more angry for a little while about something different, and then we'll go on. And this is what Kieran pointed out. We've institutionalized it. We've normalized it. We're only shocked by its magnitude, not by its occurrence.
Well, and to your point that you just made, that there was a shooting in Tulsa, I think just 2 or 3 days ago, and I didn't mention that. And so that normalization, or that we've been normalized to it, is reflected just even in that. I was thinking about this in terms of the politics of it, since you mentioned Governor Abbott, and I thought it was so interesting from a policy framing role of the mental health frame. And then they also quickly shifted it to that the local police were slow in response. And I just thought, wow, that is a really yucky way to try to turn things away from the bigger picture of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the local police may have been totally hopeless and horrible, but nonetheless, throwing them under a bus is a fantastic distraction from what we should actually talk about here is like why a mentally unstable teenager can just go buy NATO-level weapons and unleash them in a classroom. It's just outrageous. But speaking of other outrages, as a woman, are you feeling slightly outraged with your friend, Mr. Alito?
Well, I just think that there's so much to be, outraged about. I think that when we start to think about what the court, any moment getting a hand down their decision in Roe v. Wade, and also there's a big decision having to do with guns as well, There's a challenge to the New York law about conceal and carry outside of your home, and that the court is poised to strike that down, meaning that New York has a law that you have to get a license for conceal and carry outside of your home, which seems like fairly reasonable. But the court, because of the Second Amendment, is ready to strike that down. So it's like the two things that have been politically on the top of everyone's of mind, and then current events wise is then also the court is going to decide on the both to strike down the New York law and then really loosen Roe v. Wade as well. It's a dire time to think about that. I think if I were to think about this in terms of the midterms, the hope on the Democrats is that this is going to, mobilize people and get them to the polls or to the booth in November. But it seems so far away. I mean, the president's approval ratings are in the garbage can. It's just so hard to think about how this ends up as some sort of anything other than totally unmitigated disaster for the Democrats in November.
So, I've been on the Democrats are doomed thing for quite some time now, and we tend to be right when we're on this one. But let's play devil's advocate for a minute, right? So, if the Republicans ain't stupid, and they ain't stupid, then they will basically backpedal on Roe v. Wade and probably on the gun decision until after the midterms, thereby proving that they are a completely politicized institution at that point in time. But nonetheless, they'd be sensible to kick it. Now, if they're worried about long-term credibility, then you will know that if you do that, then that will hurt you more than the midterms. So you might just go for it and then see what happens. So, that might work in their favor in that one. The second one is, I was thinking about Biden's, approval, disapproval numbers, all the rest of it. Don't all presidents kind of suck around this point in time? Like when you look at Clinton, where was he?
Yeah.
Right, I think you mentioned this last time, actually. It's like, it's not actually that bad, but it is this narrative around Biden, right? I think it's less performance and more just this like, oh, Biden sucks, and that's it. And that somehow is the frame that everything gets kind of, filtered through, irrespective of what's going on.
I think that's so right. I was in the gas station paying for my $70 worth of gas. And I just overheard some people talking as they paid, and they're like, Biden's such a beep, beep, beep. Like he doesn't care he just goes and beeps things up and doesn't care. It'd be one thing if he cared, but he doesn't care at all. And I thought that was interesting, just that they assigned that he doesn't care about stuff. And that seemed to be his big calling card, that he did care. So I think you're right, one, that yes, most presidents are kind of, within the ballpark of where he is right now. But just this assignment of intention to a president that somehow he just doesn't care. And, like he's such a fill in the blank, curse word. I think there's that like personal resentment that some people really feel towards him. There's like 100 years left before the midterms, but it's, just to start to see exactly how their narrative is furthered.
I want to go back to the Roe v. Wade thing for a minute, just to ask you a question on this one. Do you think it stops at abortion, or does it go, as many people are saying, towards birth control? Does that necessarily follow? Because that would seem to be a sort of like real Taliban move, that one, that would cost them. I
think that it moves towards the fetal personhood first, and then potentially to the birth control. But it's hard to know sort of where the decision making between abortion to birth control, because abortion is such a horrible sounding word, and it's so easy to get people, really mobilized around that. And then birth control seems like something, your teenage daughter needs because she has really bad cramps or something like that. And it seems less horrific than the medical procedure. So I think it's potentially further down the line. Never say never, but I think it's maybe a third or fourth click down that particular policy. Because
at that point, you really are in Margaret Atwood land. Once you get to that point, it's one thing to politicize abortion to the extent that we have, but once you start actually going into birth control, it's like we are now actively regulating bedroom practice.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then Greg Abbott, he's also proposed this weird thing in relation to Roe v. Wade, that public education shouldn't actually be publicly funded. So then we're really in Margaret Atwood territory, in that, who needs free education when it should just entirely be privatized? So that's something fun to think about.
Excellent. Back in short-term pain land,
Yes.
inflation. So Biden has actually come out with this press release that's been picked up, and he wrote an op-ed type thing for the Times and the Wall Street Journal and this sort of stuff, and his plans on fighting inflation. One of the really interesting aspects of this, and hat tip to Dan, our engineer, for finding this one, was this press release from the White House. I don't know if you got a chance to look at it. And it's about shipping. Basically, a full sort of 1% of inflation is estimated to be shipping costs, because guess what, like everything else in the world, particularly in the world of the US economy, this has become a kind of giant oligopoly that's run by 3 or 4 firms, and they all price fix, and their profits have gone up from like 3% to 57% margins and all this sort of stuff. And they've got a nice little graph that shows this. And it's just, you know, there's the thing from The Guardian about a month ago where they went through all the top US firms and, you know, listening in on their investor calls, and they're all saying, oh, our profits are through the roof, it's amazing, we've got so much, right? And we're still doing this thing where it's like, well, labor, you know, people are pushing for these wage increases and it's unaffordable. It's like, no, this is simply profit gouging by these massive corporations. When are we going to get a hold of this? So it's interesting that what Biden's trying to do, or the people around him, are like trying to change that narrative. But there's a weird way in which it's so hard to change this, because the Democrats themselves have bought into and actively propagated the kind of fiscal responsibility, the Fed should be in charge, which all relies in a sense on a kind of monetary theory of inflation that is amenable to basically kind of, you know, the unhinging of expectations, the wage price spiral, all that sort of stuff. So they spent 30 years basically buying into this theory of inflation. What happens now is a war and a series of supply shocks and the unraveling of globalization are a bunch of corporations that take advantage of this to raise prices. And now they've got to pivot and turn and start talking about this. So it just seems weird, because suddenly it's like, now we're talking about shipping. Right, it's just, you know, it's like turning the super tanker, right? How do you get from that one narrative of like, it's all about money, Milton Friedman was right, money, 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 and they go, actually, it's not money, it's all supply chain stuff, it's about globalization blowing up, and we have to turn it around and look at the price of shipping containers, and it's like, where are you going with this? Because you're still talking as if, like, you know, the monetary story is true, and then you're saying, oh, we can control inflation, well, we can do something about it, it's the shipping companies. And it's like, I mean, I personally think that that's true, but it just doesn't seem convincing. I don't know. What do you think?
But I think exactly along the lines of what you were saying is that it's, I mean, like, because I know everything, you know, I think that, for example, in relation to the baby formula, that there's no baby formula on the shelves, but Abbott controls 50% of the market on that. Like, but then how do you explain in like less than 15 bullet points that this is really what the problem is with the baby formula and the FDA, and then everyone's fallen asleep? So there's just no clear, like, this is the problem, or this is the solution. And I know that things are much more complicated than one thing equals one thing, but that's like, if you can't kind of boil it down to that, that's what politics is. And then to convince people that your way is the way that they should be going. I mean, I've heard other commentators say in relation to gun violence, there needs to be a major march on Washington. Parents bring their kids into demand. I mean, then that's a visual of sort of what the solution is. But I mean, to the point that you're making, like the nuance of like, it's shipping or inflation and consumer demand with, you know, 58,000 other things. It becomes, the waters become so muddied on it. And no one wins out of that except Republicans, who can say, I'm the solution for all these problems, because they're not in power.
Yeah, and the solution is always the same thing, which is vote for me. I will run down the government and make things suck. And then I'll say, look at that government, it sucks, we should fund it even less. And then, you know, you just rinse and repeat, and it just gets worse and worse. Yeah. So Britain is an interesting point of comparison here. Of course, Britain has even higher inflation than the US. And a huge part of this is fuel prices. Because they ran down gas storage and they basically signed all these short-term contracts and blah, blah, blah. There's lots of technicalities leading into it. But the bottom line is they don't have public utilities like us. They privatized everything. And now these private companies are capped in how much they can raise prices. But because the wholesale market's gone crazy because of the Russian invasion in Ukraine and all the rest of it, then they have to pass on these increases. But in Britain, it's amazing. I was talking to John Hopkin at the LSE today, and he was saying in some cases, millions of households are facing 100% or more increases in fuel bills.
Holy cow.
Right, so you think about 60% of Britain is essentially a low-wage economy with extremely high costs, particularly for housing, particularly if you're renting. And your gas bill just went from 80 quid to 180 quid. Right, you literally, that's an eat, no heat decision. So it's affecting millions. This finally seems to be the thing that's beginning to put a dent into the Conservatives. Is it what they're calling the cost of living crisis? And again, it's inflation. Now, of course, go back to the US. What causes the inflation? It was all those stimulus checks. No, it wasn't. The last one was printed over 12 months ago and spent 9 months ago. And it was equivalent to 1 month's median wages being dumped into the system, right? That's basically it. And the Brits didn't do that. And now they've got super high inflation. Why? Because of fuel, right? So, it's weird. We have this inability to just talk about what actually is going on in a clear and transparent way so we can fix the problem. It's like anything. We managed to politicize vaccines. We politicize masks. Now we're politicizing inflation.
That's what my follow-up question to this was, and then you answered it, was, are the Tories being punished for this? Or is that just too American of a way?
So one of the ways to think about the way that the Tories found a successful kind of post-Brexit formula, or rather Brexit through Brexit till now formula, was nationalism for the North, lots of flag waving and blaming the EU and all this nonsense. And then essentially kind of like policies that protect the asset holding classes in the South. And key in those asset protecting, in that asset protecting bucket is fighting inflation, because inflation is a tax on financial wealth, right? So they basically, okay, we need to jack up interest rates because that in a sense compensates asset holders for the inflation. But if you were to raise interest rates significantly at a time when your fuel prices are going through the roof to a population that is already cash strapped, you can forget winning the next election. So they're really in a bind. And what they did was they swore blind they weren't going to do a windfall tax on the energy companies. And they had to, because it was the only way they could find sufficient revenues to rebate to households to stop them going mental. So they're under real strain for the first time. Boris went into some Westminster Abbey or some nonsense today to show up for one of these Diamond Jubilee events. We'll get onto that in a minute. And he was booed. Now, if you think about the people who show up for royal events, right, that's the Tories' core constituency.
Right.
So if he's being booed, that's kind of interesting.
But does the war in Ukraine loosen up fuel then for the UK? I mean, is it that simple, or is it so many different tentacles to this that now there's no easy solution and Brits are stuck with double the price for fuel?
It's a knock-on effect into the sort of the global oil and gas markets. I mean, basically that plus the structure of energy supply and the type of contracts that they sign all the way from the supply chain at the beginning right down to households. It's just basically everyone wants to pass on the cost of the end user. The end user is the household.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
So they just get it that way. But speaking of Ukraine, are you bored yet? Have you actually? Does it pass the Apple News test? Have you opened up your Apple doom scroll device and found that Ukraine is not one of the top stories?
I like the Apple. I don't follow Apple News. I read this story a long time ago about the person who runs it is like the most powerful person in the world because they
get to decide what's there, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that was my question to you: is where is it on the Apple scroll? Whether it was top or if it had fallen off the bottom? Because I remember that you mentioned that last time.
I did check today, and it's there because it's the 100th anniversary, 100 days since the war began.
Okay.
So this is an opportunity for everybody to sort of like play their moral virtue to the top. So you have the kind of like neocon Cold Warrior types, which isn't a left or right distinction. It goes all the way from like Anne Applebaum to the sort of real straightforward conservative neocons, which is Putin must be defeated. And, as we said before, quite how you're going to get there, I'm not entirely sure, right? When you're trying to do this lightning strike in 5 different places with like with the army that he's got, that went badly. Now he's just basically destroying Western Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, inch by inch with artillery and moving in and occupying it. And that is tremendously successful because they don't have any way to defeat it. Now, we've got this new thing. We're going to give them some rockets. It's like, okay, great. So then you push their artillery back and then they start doing even sort of like longer rocket charges at you or whatever, right? So there's no sort of out on this. It's just this horrible grinding war of attrition. And, the debate here in the UK and other places And you've got the sort of the cold warriors on one side. Then you've got the kind of the can this all just be over? So you've got the Italians, the Hungarians, and the Germans who talk a good game but do nothing to support the Ukrainians, right? They basically are like, oh God, can we just get our gas and oil back? This is becoming a huge pain in the neck. Can this just go away? Now, given the fact that you all grandstanded your moral commitments, no, you can't just make this one go away. And in the middle of all this is the poor bloody Ukrainian people whose countries been turned into an absolute disaster zone. So yeah, we're 100 days in. Nobody has an end game. Nobody has an off ramp. Nobody knows what's going on. And the only person who's winning at this point is Putin.
Right, and who will, I mean, if he gets what he wants, occupy eastern Ukraine, which is now just rubble. So, I mean, I guess it'll be like...
Yeah, he did that in Syria, he did it in Grozny, they've done it before. I mean, that's it. Welcome, we won, we destroyed everything. The really dangerous one is if they continue along the south coast and they basically take Odessa and then there's no more sea access for Ukraine. It just turns it into kind of like large Byelorussia. That's not good. That would be extremely dangerous. That could be one where you could, because then you're up against a NATO border.
Yeah.
Right. So that one could. So it depends when Putin decides enough is enough. That's when it's going to be over.
Right, and we just kind of hang on until he makes some sort of decision on that.
Which is horrid, but here it is.
Yeah. Well, let me try to do. Your transitions have been so smooth. Let me see if I can move from Putin to Meghan and Harry, who are back for the Platinum Jubilee.
What's the are you going to try that again? What's the segue that you could possibly do from Putin to Harry and Meghan?
I'm trying to think if there's any, personality characteristics, but there isn't. But maybe people who. Maybe I could see Putin wanting to go to LA and live in LA and live in Santa Barbara. He just wants to relax. He's stressed to the max. He just wants a little relaxation time. Live near Oprah, use his money that he stole.
I think you've managed to confuse him with his other brother because that just doesn't strike me as that guy. But anyway, let's go for it then. So you, as a real American, because I'm obviously a fake imported American, totally. What do you think of this wonderful thing that we've got called the Diamond Jubilee and the repatriation of Harry and Meghan? I mean, come on.
Well, I have to say, the Queen, because she is very much, for both of us, has been the Queen our entire lifetimes. And so it is kind of incredible to think that she will step down and it will be Prince Charles who will be the king. So just the longevity that she showed up with, and did the whole port or whatever it's called when she stood on the grand balcony and that sort of stuff. That just in and of itself, I thought was really impressive. And then I thought when I saw the pictures of Meghan and Harry, I thought, well, now we've just moved into the celebrity stuff where they're on People magazine, which I'm still interested in. But I just now want to know, behind the scenes, did Harry and William talk?
I have another theory. You know why they had to bring them back?
What?
Because once it turned out that the second son was basically a confessed child molester.
Yes.
Remember, right?
Yes.
Suddenly they didn't look so bad.
Suddenly he looks like the prince that he is.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, well, hang on a minute. Yeah. Wait a minute. We can't wheel out Andrew anymore. He's a bit, so what are we going to do? We'll bring the Americans back. Come on, let's give him another chance.
What are your thoughts about the Queen as a Scot?
So it's interesting. As somebody who was raised on the welfare state, I'm not anyone to criticise someone who lives in government property and state handouts. Yeah. So, we're two of a kind, essentially. They're just a different type of sort of welfare case. I've never actually been that worked up about it. If I put my sociological hat on and see them as a kind of zenith of the British class structure and Oxford and Cambridge and, this network of little schools in Oxbridge and all these royals and people connected to them that basically run the country for real and everyone else is just pretending, then I suppose I could get slightly annoyed about it. But most of the time I just don't give it a thought. I think they're kind of comical in a way that this country still has this stuff. It enables things. It enables things like, politics of distraction and Brexit and all this sort of stuff. And that you've got this flag-waving nationalism with this bunch of ex-German squatters as sort of the royal family. So, I've never actually been that bothered by it in a sense. It'd be interesting to see how the succession goes. And that, Charles is wildly unpopular. So if he's going to be sort of holding it for more than a decade, who knows what that does to the longevity. The younger one, one. William seems to be the only one who actually understands how the whole thing's worked and what his role in it is. And maybe he's just not relishing stepping up to the plate to be that, but it looks like him and his wife are going to be the ones that, the public would actually have an affection for, etc. But I don't know, maybe they go European. I mean, there's a lot of European royals that survived, and they did so by going out to work and paying taxes.
Yeah.
So, maybe if they do that, maybe if they finally get off welfare and get themselves a job, then they can earn my respect.
I mean, but I think it's just interesting that, this is kind of like any political thing that we can think about, but there's like a certain trust in the Queen, and that people, generally think that she doesn't do bad stuff. And, I'm sure there's, financial shenanigans that happen, but you do wonder, like, as the new generation comes on board, if people are just like, yeah, you're just like kind of the, kind of A-level Hollywood celebrity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
they're more like, They're more like celebs than sort of, deities in a sense. And years ago, back in the 1980s, there used to be a companion magazine to the surviving one, which is called New Statesman. New Statesman is actually, I think it's still New Statesman in Society, because they used to have this other mag called New Society. And Julie Burchill, the journalist, wrote in this essay, which I read when I was a teenager. And it was just one of the first sort of pieces of kind of academic journalistic writing where I read it and I went, wow, that is insightful. And she wrote this essay called The Last Sacred Cow. And the basic argument that she made was that whatever the media creates, the media has to destroy.
That's such a great point.
And ultimately, if you think about it, the royals are just the ultimate media creation, because they're useful to them. They can pack out pages, sell the newspaper, sell a bit of sort of, right-wing jingoistic nationalism and a nice toffee wrapper, all this sort of stuff. Yeah. But they're also the people that destroyed Diana. Right, they're also the people that, will eventually turn once the Queen goes on someone else, probably Andrew for his various transgressions, right? And they don't really care so long as they're selling copy. And it's a question of how resilient that whole charade is once the Queen goes.
Yeah.
They never go after her, but they go after everybody else. Yes. Charles will be totally fair game.
Oh yeah, he'll be toast too. Yeah. This is a great segue. This is going to be much more natural to the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. Talk about what the media creates and what the media takes down. I got like little bits of it, and I was mostly sort of fascinated by what people do when they have too much money. Like Johnny Depp buys a horse farm for $30 million and then sells it to Martha Stewart, like that sort of stuff. And then just the back and forth, it's just like one of those things that I just kind of wanted to put in a box and put away, because it just felt like looking through someone's trash that I didn't really need to know all these details.
But the bigger issues there are interesting. So the first one was just, the absolute global defenestration of Amber Heard. Right. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know how apocryphal the story is, but apparently there's a Hollywood Starbucks that had 2 tip jars. And one was called Johnny and one was called Amber. And Johnny was overflowing and Amber had nothing in it.
Jeez, wow.
Right. So there was just this sort of because, maybe, I don't know, I didn't follow it that closely. Maybe she's not a credible witness. Maybe she contradicts herself. Maybe she actually is quite violent. Who knows, right? But what I thought was fascinating was the narrow part of the case was basically, did she defame him in that op-ed? So I got the op-ed and I looked at it and I went, well, I could see why you could intuit that that's him, but it's really not about him. And this is why when they tried this in London, Depp lost. Mm-hmm. But then they put it in front of a jury and basically you have this incredible media fest where she's the worst person in the world. And, guess what? Suddenly it is about defaming him. Now, I know she tripped herself up in the stand. I'm not sort of saying, it went wrong or whatever. But the sort of the sociology behind it, I'm really into sociology today. I don't know why. But the sociology behind it, the sort of like the other side of celebrity, is again this thing whereby they take you up and then when they decide you're going down, Amber, in this case, you are going down big time. Yeah. So that I thought that was a really interesting and sort of really violent part of the whole thing.
Well, and that somehow the Depp lawyers were able to change it from he did this to me to no, she did this to me, and therefore I'm really the victim here. And it was, the response from her lawyers after the decision was, this is, a way for, to make women scared to speak out and that sort of stuff. And I guess now I don't really know if I have any clear thoughts on it other than to say I think like 50% of that is true, but it's also within this, like through this gauze of this Hollywood celebrity thing. So it's hard for me to have a really clear sense of like whether it has any real, implication for those of us who are not Hollywood celebrities.
So on the other side of the pond in the UK, you're probably not aware of this. There's exactly the same thing going on in another celeb battle trial. And it's between Colleen Rooney, who is the wife of Wayne Rooney, the ex-Manchester United and England footballer, and Rebecca Vardy, who is the wife of Leicester City and ex-England striker Jamie Vardy. Do you know about this?
No, I don't. I only know one of those names too. Yeah.
All right. So here's what happened in short form, right? Somebody was selling stories about Colleen Rooney and her family to the Sun newspaper. And she wanted to find out who it was. So she has a private Instagram group. So what she did was she basically banned everybody except this one person she thought was doing it. She like knocked them off one at a time. And then by process of elimination, right, basically figured out it was her. And she revealed that it was this person. And she used this phrase, it was Rebecca Vardy's account. Right? So what happened is Vardy basically comes out and goes, it wasn't me. Lots of people have access to my account, including my agent, etc. I wasn't doing this. And the whole thing ends up in court for defamation, right? They're spending millions on it, right? Now, 2 points of contact with the Depp thing. The first one is, if you're going to burnish your reputation by trashing someone else's, as Jesus said, let him who is without sin cast the first piece of poo, right?
Yeah,
and the stuff that's been coming out in this, and just like particularly on the Vardy side, just making her look really, really bad. It's like, even if you win this, you're definitely going to lose it, right? The second sort of point of contact on it is the gender dynamic in this one's gone because it's two women. Right?
Yeah.
And what you do find then is that behind is this entire industry of lawyers who basically make millions with people like revealing in public all of their garbage. It's so weird. So there's a great podcast on BBC Sounds called Wagatha Christie, because that's what Colleen Rooney got nicknamed, because she's one of the WAGs, the wives and girlfriends, right? That's all right. Yep. So it was Wagatha Christie. So if you're into this sort of stuff, have a listen to the first few episodes of the podcast. It's really kind of fascinating. But it's the same dynamics as the Depp Heard case.
Oh, I'm going to definitely listen to that. I like Wagatha Christie as well. But that's very
good. Yes,
very catchy. So it's the start of summer. Have you seen Top Gun? Are you going to see Top Gun?
I haven't been back to the cinema.
Oh, you haven't?
No, I just wait until. I mean, I've got behind this door is a cinema. Yeah. So
I
just wait until
blank space.
I just wait until it drops onto a platform and then watch it. It's like going to the cinema. And it was bad enough when you could Batman would show up and start machine gunning you, right? But now you've got possible plague as well. It's just like, oh, for God's sake! And then you got people talking all the way through the bloody film. It's just like annoying. Forget it. So no, I haven't been.
I did go see Batman, which was an experience. I went at like 2:00, so there was nobody there.
How was it? How was the Batman reboot?
I actually thought it was pretty good. The best since Christian Bale. I think there's Ben Affleck in between, but anyway, I thought Robert Pattinson was actually pretty good. Top Gun is like when I was kind of understood what was going on in the world, but not really. So there is a lot of nostalgia in seeing the second one and seeing that Tom Cruise clearly never. Scientology doesn't age you either. So I will, but I think I'm going to wait to see this one through streaming too and not go to the movie theater.
So the other thing that I've suddenly, it's not that I ever had a passion for these, but remember how you just couldn't avoid Marvel superhero films?
Yes.
Right. Like they were just always there, and somehow you just ended up going to see them, and it's like, oh, bugger, I'll need to go see Endgame, whatever, right? So you end up seeing these things, and you justify going to the movies because it's the big screen and all that sort of stuff. And so now there's been other ones that have come out. I've got absolute, maybe it's just age. I'm just sort of like, don't care. Just don't. No, I'm not going to do it. Just don't care. Yeah. At some point, Doctor Strange 2 will drop onto a platform and I'll watch it, but it's just not enough to motivate me to go out and do it.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I know there's not really any big movie that I'm looking forward to. And usually there's some big,
that was a very 90s thing and early to, that's 80s, 90s, the summer blockbuster.
Yes.
Coming this summer, this kind of stuff.
That's good.
And yeah, exactly. But no, don't do that anymore. So listen, do we have any stories of hope Do we have any positive things to give our listeners on the way out the door rather than just, I'm getting mail now just saying sort of like, hey, I love the podcast. Never felt so depressed. So, can we get a light note? Have you got something you can give us?
Well, so Dan, our engineer, prompted me yesterday to start thinking about this. But it's taken me a while to come up with something. And here's mine, is that graduation at Brown was over the weekend. And I love graduation. It's just as I love pomp and circumstance, and it's always a celebratory atmosphere.
We've got that in Britain. It's called the Diamond Jubilee. You should check it out.
I didn't know. And
we wrote the book on pomp and circumstance.
I know. I love that kind of stuff.
You know where all this stuff? You know where this stuff came from, by the way. So what happened was Queen Victoria went into a huge depression when her husband died quite young. And she basically spent 10 years in a black frock being mean to her children. Okay. And Benjamin Disraeli, the Prime Minister at that point, figured out the whole royal house was going to go. And if it went, then what happens to Parliament and what happens to the Tories and all the rest of it. So he basically invented all this stuff and put it in place and just said to Victoria, look, you're on your last legs, get in that coach and start waving at people and all. So all the stuff since time immemorial, it was a rescue operation for the monarchy in the 1850s.
And ride around in the carriage around Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, there's nonsense. Yeah, and trooping of the colour and the second birthday and all that nonsense. Yeah, it's all made up.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, Hope. Back to Hope.
So one of the honorary degrees was given to Shaggy, who is a Jamaican reggae dance hall. You might remember It Wasn't Me was one of his big hits, but also a real philanthropist as well, and has given away, I think, hundreds of millions of dollars through his philanthropy. He gave remarks. There was a combo graduation, class of 2020, class of 2022. He gave remarks to class of 2020. And it was just so touching listening to him. I didn't go to college. I wish I had the college experience. Here's my, words of wisdom. And one of them was, every time that I doubted myself, I leaned into my talent. And that was what sort of got me through tough times. And I believed in myself. I mean, not anything that was like rocket science, but it was just really nice. And just the joy on his face. And he did a little rap at the end. And to see, and you'll appreciate this as a professor, seeing like the top administrators kind of bopping along to reggae was funny.
That's a terrifying. That's not hopeful. That's terrifying.
It is terrifying. But it was just nice. Yeah. And it was and you just kind of felt good after that. So that was my good/hope inspiring news item.
Oh, it's not bad. It's not a bad one to sort of leave us to begin the summer, to think that graduation opens up new possibilities. A new crop of young and idealistic folks tasked with fixing climate change have now migrated into Wall Street and the consulting industry to sell ESG products to each other. So, that's hopeful, I guess. Help.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm off to Europe in the middle of June through July, and then I'll be back. And then I'm going to spend the last 6 weeks of the summer with one of my postdocs, madly writing a short book.
Whoa. Can you give us any preview or no?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So for all those publishers out there to set up a frenzy of interest, we're going to write a little short book called Inflation, a Guide for Losers and Users.
Oh, well, now that is a hot topic.
That's a hot one, isn't it? Exactly.
Yes.
There are 120 pages, everything you ever wanted to know, why most people are talking bullshit, who actually wins as well as loses, because not everybody loses, shipping companies. So, we'll just do a whole sort of like survey of the whole thing, throw it out there and see what people think.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Well, I hope that I see you before the end of summer.
Yeah, we should. So I'm back middle of July, so let's get together at end of July and we'll do our sizzling summer special.
That would be awesome. It was great to see you.
You too.
Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.